Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is a series of videos where I discuss ceiling fan history and trivia and technical information. Today's video is about emperors. And I know it's weird to call the video that because that's not the correct name. That is the name that one company gave their model of this style of fan. And we as collectors have started calling them all that just because I think that was the first name that we knew. But there is no universal name for that style of fan other than calling them emperors or Marco Polos or all the other names we'll get into shortly. So if you don't know what it is, go ahead and look on YouTube or Google Images or whatever and just type in emperor ceiling fan. Fat motor housing, ornate badges around the side of the motor housing that kind of look vaguely Egyptian. Sometimes an ornate canopy, usually ornate fat blade irons, usually cane blades, sometimes an ornate switch housing, oftentimes a schoolhouse globe with like a trumpet-shaped light fitter. I believe the motor housings, I don't think we've ever seen one with a cast motor housing. It's always a stamped steel motor housing, and it's always a spinner motor. So, one of the first questions I've always wanted to answer, and I wish I had more concrete information for this video, who came out with the Emperor style of fan? First, was it a copy of the Casablanca Broadway? Because it's kind of similar in style and shape. And so what were they copying? Who came out with it first? And what was the first version called? I don't have a clear answer to that. I have kind of an answer for that, and we'll get into some more stuff in a little bit. So, going through old fan ads and catalogs and everything I could find, the first time an Emperor shows up in pictures is in 1979, and it's in an ad for a Florida chain called Jackson's Lighting. And it just shows up with a picture of one with no information about the fan specifically. That is the only picture of an Emperor I can find in 1979. And Jackson's Lighting, in their other ads, shows Crompton Greaves and Union fans. And the only brand they mention is Old Plantation fans, which only turns up at Jackson's Lighting. So that may have been a house brand of theirs. It may have been something that they imported as a house brand fan. We don't know. That's just what turns up. By 1981, that chain is now selling Casablanca, Hunter, and Moss. So that's the first time one shows up in print that I can find. If you can find a picture of an Emperor fan from 1979 with any information about where it was sold or what it was sold as, send it my way. That's the only thing I found from 79. That's the only evidence that I have that they existed before 1980, which is the big year for them showing up. 1980, they show up as the Moss Marco Polo, which I incorrectly assumed was the first of the Emperor-styled fans. Until I'd found this prior art, I was going with the theory that Moss came up with that style and everybody else was copying Moss, or it was a result of David Moss's various activities that we discussed in the Moss video. So, Moss comes out with that style in 1980 and offers it as the Moss Marco Polo through 1985. 1985 to 1990, as we covered in the Moss video, is the Moss trademark wars between Moss, Home Depot, King of Fans, etc. They're all, Home Depot and King of Fans is using Moss's trademarks, and they sue each other, and so on and so forth. In 1992, the term Marco Polo shows up again to describe the Emperor-styled fan, but it's used as a Builder's Square house brand, probably also King of Fans. But again, it's probably a result of the Moss trademark wars. And then from 1995 to 1996, ironically, SMC emperors were referred to as Marco Polo, which I find really interesting. Okay, here's another clue. In 1980, a company called the Regency Fan Company shows up with an Emperor-styled fan. It looks identical to the very earliest Moss Marco Polos and the Jackson's Lighting art, with the really thin cane, the really fat blade, just the earliest version that we've seen of an Emperor. They show those fans from 1980 to 1982, and it's the only version of the Emperor that's shown without a switch housing. Now, in the art that they show it without a switch housing, it still has the light fitter, so I'm not certain that it's the same as the ones that I have that literally could be used without the light fitter, or if it's just the way it's drawn. But it's the only art that shows up like that, and that is the Regency Fan Company, 1980 to 1982. Side note, I have been trying to figure out if that's the same Regency that was later bought by Tacony, We'll get into that a little bit later. So we're going to keep going with Emperor-style fans that show up in 1980. Also in 1980, the Supreme Mark III shows up from 1980 to 1985. And I am 99% sure that Supreme's OEM was Commander. I think we talked about that in the Asian manufacturers video, but that's a topic for another time. Anything else show up in 1980? No, the next one to show up in 1982, the Casa Rosa shows up, which is Commander's Emperor. And that's sold from 82 to 84. Okay, that brings us to 83, which is the big year because that's when SMC introduces theirs, which is actually called the Emperor. The first one was called the Emperor 1, and that's the version with the bell canopy. And that started out in 1983, and that was sold in some version or another. Again, they changed details over the years through 1997. Definitely the longest running Emperor-styled fan. And in 1985 is the first example I can find of their Emperor Hugger showing up. But I'm guessing that it showed up earlier than that. I just haven't found an example. It could not have been earlier than 91. So somewhere between 91 and 95, the SMC Emperor Hugger shows up. Okay, then that brings us to the Evergo Roma, which my favorite Emperor is the earliest version of those with the really weird blade tips and either variable speed or step speed, etc. That also was a 1983 edition, and it was sold through 1986. And the Roma Hugger shows up 1 year only in 1986. Okay, we talked about Saff and Homer during the Key Largo video. Emperor, their model of the Emperor was called the Atlanta, and it shows up 83 to 85, labeled both Saff and Homer. They also had a Hugger version that was called the Polo. And again, we also talked about in that video how in, I believe, 83, they had just a relabeled Marco Polo, the Moss Emperor, as Saff. Okay, so I said we're going to come back to Regency. So, Tacony bought Regency in 87. Some company documentation says the 90s, but there are ceiling fans labeled Tacony dating back to 87. And prior to buying Regency, Tacony was a sewing machine company, and they sold some other things, but they did not enter the ceiling fan market until they bought Regency. So 87 would have been when they bought Regency. Interestingly enough, so I told you before, those Regency Emperors, which are the only fans that I can find by the Regency Fan Co. When I search for the Regency Fan Company from 80 to 82, all that shows up is Emperors. But from 82 to 86, nothing shows up from the Regency Fan Company. When you type in Regency Ceiling Fan, you get the Code-Up Regency, you get a Regency model by, I think, Design House. I can't remember all the different companies that use Regency in their fan model names, but Regency Fan Co. disappears from 82 to 86, but in their place, fans show up labeled Horizon and Vista, which we know were subsidiaries or connected in some way with Regency. And so they had an Emperor version that sold from 82 to 86 called the Omega. And that was sold under the Horizon name and the Vista name. And then in 87 to 92, the Omega is still sold and it looks identical, but they dropped the Horizon and Vista names. It's just sold as a store brand fan in various stores. So, again, this is one of those videos where there's a lot of questions answered and a lot of new questions pop up. My theory about the first Emperor is that it was either literally an import specifically for Jackson's Lighting house brand, which was probably old Plantation fans, or it was the Regency Fan Company, and that was sold at Jackson's Lighting and it just wasn't mentioned in ads until later. But again, we know they showed up before Moss, which is what surprised me, because I was just running with the assumption that Moss was the earliest Emperor-styled fan with the Marco Polo in 1980. The other thing that's really curious about all that is, again, 79 is like right when we were first starting to get wood blades and brass plating from import companies. So there's always the possibility that the wood and the brass was initially done here. I think it's kind of unlikely given how homogenized all those CEC made emperors are, but you know. So we definitely learned that, and then like I said, the other thing that I'm still trying to chase down is the Regency Fan Company that sold nothing but emperors from 80 to 82. Is that the same Regency that became Horizon, Vista, and Tacony? I am suspecting that it is, but I don't know for sure. And again, when you look up Regency Fan Company and Regency Ceiling Fan, it's a common name. A lot of companies have used that. So again, I hope we learned a lot. If you have concrete evidence to answer some of the questions that are presented, shoot it my way. I'm happy to listen to theories as well, but I'm not going to publish theories until we can confirm them. But until then, I hope you've enjoyed this YouTube series. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and ring all the notification bells. Thanks for watching.